Let's begin with Chapter 6, Implementing a Planned Response. In this lesson, we will be covering the operations level of how to size up an incident, identify and describe safety procedures at a hazardous materials incident, describe the protective actions at the operations level. We will also identify and describe the components of the incident command system and explain the role of the operations level responder in implementing a planned response. Scene control influences scene security and personnel accountability. It starts with size up, the rapid mental process of evaluating the critical visual indicators of the incident, processing that information based on your training and experience, and arriving at a conclusion that will serve as a basis to form and implement a plan of action. Size up is always a work in progress. Follow a decision-making algorithm and use it as a loose guide to develop an action plan as well as focus your thinking. Now let's discuss the response safety procedures. With isolating of the release area, methods should include stretching banner tape and posting law enforcement or site security personnel in the area. Mark off as much of the real estate as you can control and consult the emergency response guidebook if necessary. Other initial actions could include evacuating others from the immediate area, implementing a shelter-in-place strategy, and rendering emergency medical care in a safe location away from the release, as well as surveying the scene to detect indicators of a hazardous materials release. The next steps should be to maintain your own safety by not entering the area unless properly protected and trained. Gather the necessary scene information, follow the local emergency response plan for your agency's response guidelines, and follow the policies and procedures of the authority having jurisdiction for the reporting of the status of the response. A CAN report stands for conditions, your current status or the status of the incident, the actions, what are you doing, what is being done by your team, and what is occurring with the incident, and lastly, needs, any additional resources or actions that are needed to accomplish the task. A CAN report is useful when you are briefing others about a task or the status of the incident. An incident commander is requesting information from individuals or teams engaged in the incident, and the incident commander, group leader, or any other leadership function needs to broadcast information to all responders within a group or on the scene. This is very beneficial because it allows the incident commander to be aware of what's going on with the crews working in the hot zone of the incident. With identifying and securing possible ignition sources, this is especially important when the incident involves the release of flammable materials. Also use radios and electronic devices that have been certified as intrinsically safe in these areas to inhibit the risk of explosion hazards. Scene control procedures should include setting control zones. Establish these at a hazardous materials incident based on the chemical and physical properties of the release material, the environmental factors at the time of the release, and the general layout of the scene itself. Limit access to the incident site. Inside a structure, controlling access at the doors is the best key. For outdoor incidents, controlling intersections, on and off ramps, service roads, and other access points may be necessary. The size of the control zone should not be defined too liberally or too narrowly. Control zones can change as the incident commander gets more information about the incident specifics of the chemical or material involved. Be prepared to expand or contract control zones if necessary. Types of control zones are typically labeled hot, warm, or cold, but may also be terms such as exclusion zone, contamination reduction zone, or outer perimeter. Perform regular and consistent training, making sure all responders are on the same page with terminology with the incident. The hot zone is the area immediately surrounding the release. It is the most contaminated area. All personnel in this zone must wear complete appropriate protective clothing and equipment. Boundaries should be large enough to adverse effects from the release substance will not affect people outside of the hot zone. The physical characteristics of the release substance will affect the size and layout of the hot zone itself. All responders in the hot zone should avoid contact with the product to the greatest extent possible and access should be limited to only persons necessary to control the incident. And all personnel must be decontaminated when they leave this hot zone area. The warm zone is where personnel and equipment transition into and out of the hot zone. The warm zone contains control points for access to the hot zone, the decontamination corridor. People working in the warm zone can generally wear PPE rated one level lower than that of the PPE used within the hot zone. And lastly, the cold zone is a safe area where personnel do not need to wear specialized protective clothing. The cold zone contains personnel staging, the command post, EMS providers, the area for medical monitoring, support, and/or treatment after decontamination. Now let's talk about protective actions at the operations level. Life safety actions should include ensuring your own safety, searching for and possibly rescuing persons immediately exposed to the substance or those who may now be in harm's way, and using a risk-based method on decision making. Factors to consider when making decisions about evacuation should include the nature and duration of the release, the nature of the evacuees, the ability to support the evacuees with basic services, and transportation challenges that could occur. When considering evacuation, a significantly large group of people considering the shunts associated with the task: contamination, communication, transportation, nutrition, sanitation, habitation, and compassion. A lot of these things are going to have to come into play when you're dealing with a large group of evacuees to make sure their needs are met both comfortably and medically. Firefighters and law enforcement personnel may be called upon to assist in the physical relocation of residents. A safe area with suitable facilities must be established before the evacuation order is given. Schools, fairgrounds, and sports arenas are often used in this case. Safe areas should be close enough for the evacuation to be practical, but far enough from the incident to be safe. Temporary evacuation areas must be needed until evacuation sites are open and accessible. Security should be accomplished with law enforcement assistance, and access should be monitored and controlled. Transportation must be arranged for all populations. Evacuation is a process measured in hours, and pre-planning is essential. When determining the area to be evacuated, use detection and monitoring devices to identify areas for airborne contamination, and take local weather reporting conditions into consideration as well. For sheltering in place, this is a method of safeguarding people in a hazardous area by keeping them in an enclosed atmosphere. Local emergency plans should identify local facilities where vulnerable populations may be found. Examples include schools, churches, and hospitals. Residents should remain indoors with windows and doors closed and ventilation systems shut off. Major factors to consider when deciding whether to evacuate or use shelter-in-place strategies should include the toxicity of the hazardous material, the amount of time available to avoid the oncoming threat, the expected duration of the incident. Before beginning search and rescue, all personnel must first recognize and identify the released substance. The IC should use a risk-based thought process to understand the hazards as they relate to the possibilities of victim survivability and responder safety, and the incident commander must determine whether entry into a contaminated environment for search and rescue is a worthy endeavor. If a search can be safely performed, rescue teams wearing proper PPE may enter the hot zone to look for or retrieve victims. Victims should be removed to the warm zone, decontaminated, and turned over to EMS providers for transport to a medical facility. In nearly all cases, definitive medical care should be provided to victims who have been decontaminated. With safety briefings, the purpose of safety briefings is to inform at a minimum all responders of health hazards that are known or anticipated, the incident objectives, emergency medical procedures, radio frequencies and emergency signals used, the description of the site, and PPE to be worn. Each authority having jurisdiction should develop templates for safety plans and verbal safety briefings. If multiple entities are operating, all roles and responsibilities should be clearly defined. Using a standardized form helps. Completing the safety plan in a timely manner keeps safety briefings on track and provides a logical format that everyone can follow. Performing the briefing, it should be brief, but complete enough to provide sufficient information to all that present. At small incidents, the incident commander may be responsible for putting together a site safety plan and conducting the safety briefing. At larger incidents, an incident safety officer or hazardous materials safety officer participates in preparing and implementing the site safety plan. For significant incidents, the site safety plan and briefing may be comprehensive and documented in writing. The incident commander may establish predetermined trigger points to evaluate the status of the planned response. If there is a lack of progress, the incident commander may later decide to withdraw to a safe distance, set a defensive perimeter, wait for additional resources to arrive, or allow the incident to run its course. In the event a withdrawal is necessary, the incident commander should include evacuation signals in the pre-entry briefing. It is important to discuss incident communications. It should include procedures for interacting with the media or other outside entities. It is common for communication to be disrupted or hampered during an incident. The incident commander may designate command and tactical channels for the incident itself. Radio transmissions are an excellent way to communicate the status of the mitigation efforts, gauge the success or failure of these efforts, and if things are not going as planned, the entry team may contact the entry team leader, who may have a face-to-face conversation with the safety officer or hazardous materials safety officer. This may result in a change of tactics, modifications of the incident objectives, or a complete abandonment of the effort itself. In some jurisdictions, safety officers conduct most of the safety briefing, and in other jurisdictions, the incident commander or hazardous materials group supervisor conducts the safety briefing in conjunction with the safety officer. For incidents involving terrorism or criminal intent, the briefing may include procedures for operating at a crime scene or collecting evidence for a possible prosecution. Refer to the standard operating procedures and policies established by your agency. And a written safety plan should also include information about excessive heat disorders or cold stress responders may encounter. The buddy system and backup personnel. It consists of at least 2 responders entering a contaminated area. OSHA Hazmat requires the use of the buddy system, and the incident commander must prevent responders from working alone. Backup personnel wear the same level of protection as the initial responders going in. The backup team is required by OSHA Hazmat as well. It may be called upon to remove the individuals working in the hot zone if an emergency occurs and they are unable to escape on their own. Backup team should never be more than a minute or so from being fully dressed and ready to take action if necessary. With excessive heat disorders, this can include heat exhaustion, which is a mild form of shock that arises when the circulatory system begins to fail because the body is unable to dissipate excessive heat. The core temperature rises, followed by weakness and sweating, and other signs and symptoms can include dizziness, blurred vision, acute fatigue, headache, and muscle cramps. Individuals experiencing heat exhaustion should be removed from the heated environment, rehydrated with electrolyte solutions, and kept cool. Heat exhaustion can lead to a potentially fatal condition if not properly treated. Avoid pouring cold water or placing the victim in an unusually cold environment, and use tepid water for drinking and cooling the skin. Heat stroke is a severe and potentially fatal condition. It results from the failure of the temperature regulating capacity of the body. A reduction or cessation of sweating is an early symptom, and body temperature can rise to 105 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. Other signs and symptoms of heat stroke can include rapid pulse, hot, red-looking skin, a headache, confusion, unconsciousness, and even seizures. Heat strokes require immediate transport to a medical facility. Many agencies employ some form of cooling technology to combat heat stress while wearing this PPE. Air, ice, and water-cooled vests, phase change cooling technology could be also used. Cold temperature exposures can be caused by released materials or the operating environment. Exposures to severe cold for even a short time can cause severe injury to body surfaces. Temperature and wind speed influence the extent of cold injuries. Low temperatures with wind create wind chill. Individuals wearing chemical protective clothing will perspire regardless of the temperature outside. Wet clothing extracts heat from the body and can lead to hypothermia. When working in cold temperatures, all personnel should be aware of the dangers of frostbite, hypothermia, and impaired ability to work. Wear layered clothing and be able to warm themselves in heated shelters or vehicles if necessary. A layer of clothing next to the skin should be kept dry. Responders should carefully schedule their work and rest periods and monitor their physical work conditions as well. Personnel protective equipment physical capability requirements. Medical monitoring is the process of pre-entry and post-entry on-scene evaluation of the personnel who may be experiencing adverse effects because they are wearing PPE and they have been exposed to heat, cold, stress, or hazardous materials themselves. The goal is to quickly identify medical problems so they can be treated in a timely fashion. Responders should undergo pre-entry health screenings prior to donning any level of chemical protective equipment. The screening should include pulse rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate, body weight, and measurements, and general health should be observed. If the responder presents with an abnormal reading, he or she may be excluded from wearing PPE or even participating in the mitigation phase of the incident. A second medical evaluation should be performed after the mission is complete. If there are abnormal findings, the responder may need to be seen by a physician or transported to an appropriate receiving hospital. Now let's discuss the incident command system. FireScope, the Fire Resources of Southern California, organized the potential emergencies, identified problem areas common to almost all major complex incidents. There were ineffective communications, span of control challenges, lack of common command structure, and the inability to track personnel working on the scene, and the inability to effectively coordinate on-scene resources. It developed the modern incident command system. The key benefits include common terminology, consistent organizational structure, consistent position titles, and common incident facilities. It provides a strong organizational framework on which to lay the operational goals and objectives. It is required by OSHA Hazmat for all hazardous materials incidents. It can be expanded to handle any incident of any size and complexity. The basic ICS consists of 5 functions: command, operations, planning, logistics, and lastly, finance and administration. With command, it is established when the first unit arrives on the scene and is maintained until the last unit leaves the scene. It is directly responsible for at least the following tasks: determining strategy, selecting incident tactics, creating an action plan, developing the ICS organization, managing resources, coordinating resource activities, providing for scene safety, releasing information about the incident, and coordinating with outside agencies. Unified Command allows for representatives from various agencies cooperating to share command authority. Ideal situations for the establishment of a unified command include oil spills on navigable waterways, wildfires that threaten or occur in combination of state, federal, or local lands, hazardous materials incidents on public roadways or at fixed facilities, or active shooter incidents. The Incident Command Post is where the incident commander is located and where coordination, control, and communications are all centralized. Requests for additional resources originate from the Incident Command Post. The Emergency Response Plans Command and all other direct support staff should be located at the Incident Command Post. The Incident Command Post should be located in an area that is not threatened by the incident and have the necessary infrastructure to support sustained operations if required. Be established uphill and upwind from any hazardous materials incident. With the command staff, the incident commander is in charge of the entire incident and should be qualified for the position itself. OSHA Hazmat requires that the on-scene incident commander should receive at least 24 hours of training equal to the first responder. Know to be able to implement the jurisdictional incident command system and know how to implement the jurisdictional emergency response plan. Know and understand the hazards and risks associated with responders working in chemical protective clothing. know how to implement the local emergency response plan, know about the state emergency response plan and the federal regional response team, and lastly, know and understand the importance of decontamination procedures. The command staff consists of the safety officer, liaison officer, and public information officer. For the safety officer, OSHA Hazmat states that the individual in charge of the ICS shall designate a safety officer who is knowledgeable in the operations being implemented at the emergency response site, with specific responsibility to identify and evaluate hazards and to provide direction with respect to the safety of the operations for the incident. And when activities are judged by the safety officer to be an IDLH or immediate danger to life and health and or to involve an imminent danger condition, the safety officer shall have the authority to alter, suspend, or terminate these activities. The safety officer shall immediately inform the individual in charge of the ICS of any actions that need to be taken to correct these hazards at the incident scene as well. The hazardous materials safety officer or assistant safety officer is responsible for hazardous team safety only. He or she reports directly to the incident safety officer, who then reports to the incident commander. The liaison officer, this is the point of contacting and cooperating and assisting agencies on the scene. On hazardous materials incidents, the liaison officer deals with agency representatives from federal agencies, state and local resources, and any other outside agency with an interest in managing the outcome of the incident. Public information officers function as a point of contact for the media or any other entity seeking information about the incident. Only one person should fill this role. By keeping the media and others well informed, it is an important piece of successfully managing any type of incident. In the general staff functions, the operations section is typically led by an operations section chief on large incidents. It carries out objectives developed by the incident commander and is responsible for all tactical operations at the incident. The operations section chief directs and manages the resources assigned to his or her section. This person is usually assigned when complex incidents involve more than 20 single resources or when the incident commander cannot be involved in all details of tactical operation. With groups or divisions, the hazardous materials group is led by a hazardous materials group supervisor. It is often established when companies and crews are working on the same task or objective. A group is assembled to relieve span of control issue and is considered to consist of functional assignments that may not be tied to one geographical location. A division refers to companies and crews that are working in the same geographical location. Groups and divisions place several single resources under one supervisor. Hazardous materials branches consist in some or all of the following positions: hazardous materials group supervisor, entry team assigned to enter the designated hot zone, decontamination team responsible for reducing and preventing the spread of contaminants from persons and equipment, and technical reference team that gathers information and reports to the incident commander and the hazardous materials safety officer. A branch presents a higher level of combined resources than a division or group. Large incidents may require several branches, and the hazardous materials branch director reports to the operations section chief or directly to the incident commander. Responsibilities of the hazardous materials branch director can include obtaining a briefing from the incident commander, staffing the hazardous materials branch functions as required, ensuring the scene control zones are established, ensuring that a site safety plan is developed by maintaining accountability, and ensuring that proper PPE is worn, and ensuring the operations objectives are being met. A hazardous materials group supervisor may be appointed under a hazardous materials branch director to direct and manage positions such as decontamination group supervisor or team leader is generally the entry team group supervisor or team leader. The management structure and ICS positions ultimately assigned are based on the needs associated with the specific incident. In some types of incidents, such as a wildfire or a multi-story structure fire, the safety officer may assign an assistant to each division working in the fire. Responsibilities of the hazardous materials safety officer can include obtaining a briefing from the incident commander, and the safety officer and/or hazardous materials branch director, participating in the preparation of the site safety plan, providing or participating in the safety briefing, altering or suspending any activity that poses an imminent threat to the responders, maintaining accountability for all resources assigned to the hazardous materials mitigation efforts. The planning section is responsible for the collection, evaluation, dissemination, and use of information relevant to the incident itself. It is led by a planning section chief who acts as a central point for collecting information on the situation status of the event, tracking and logging on-scene resources, disseminating the written incident action plan, facilitating incident briefings, and planning meetings on large-scale incidents. Logistics section is the support side of an incident management structure. It is responsible for providing facilities, services, and materials for the incidents. Logistics is headed by the logistics section chief, and he or she is responsible for providing the bulk of support functions for an incident. This position is generally assigned on long duration or resource intensive complex incidents. Logistics officers are typically like the FedEx guys. If you need something, they will find it and they will get it to you one way or another. Logistics supports includes food, sleeping facilities, transportation needs, sanitation facilities, showers, and all other requests for resources needed to manage the incident effectively. When resources are needed, the request person follows the appropriate chain of command to route the request to logistics. Logistics personnel determine whether they will be able to fill the request. During a planning meeting at a large incident, the operations section chief, planning section chief, safety officer, incident commander, and a small core of other key management positions may meet to discuss the logistics needed for the incident itself. The logistics section determines whether these needs can be met, and if so, under what time frame. The finance administration section tracks the costs related to the incident, handles procurement issues, records the time that responders are on the incident for billing purposes, and keeps a running cost of the incident as well. Large-scale incidents can cost millions of dollars. It is common to see incident objectives tied to financial constraints. Incidents should ideally be handled in the most cost-effective way possible. Now let's discuss the role of the operations level responder. NFPA 1072 standard for hazardous materials, weapons of mass destruction, emergency response personnel, professional qualifications, tasks, operations level responders with helping to protect nearby people, the environment, and property from the effects of hazardous materials release. Examples of these duties include performing various tasks of decontamination, product control, and detection and monitoring activities. All of these tasks are performed under the direction of a hazardous materials technician, an allied professional along with standard operating procedures. The scope of the operations level responder definition provides a jurisdiction with much more flexibility in its operation procedures than ever before, especially when mission-specific competencies are concerned. The AHJ may choose to train and use operations level responders strictly as support personnel, provide personnel with the training to satisfy operations level requirements. As a responder, you should be familiar with all emergency response plans for hazardous materials incidents that may occur within your jurisdiction. If none exist, you should default to the scope of practice established by your training when you are called into service. Jurisdictions commonly predetermine response levels and response configurations to anticipate hazards. Agencies use a wide variety of methods to identify and denote the severity of certain types of incidents. Establish these thresholds to take guesswork out of determining the type and amount of resources required and to handle the problem, and the levels of training required for the responding personnel. So in summary, at a hazardous materials incident, scene control is paramount because it has an influence on both scene security and personnel accountability. Isolation of the released area is one of the first measures that operations level responders should always implement. The CAN report, Conditions, Actions, and Needs, allows you to distill a message down to its most basic parts. what it is that's going on, where are we at, and what do we need. The 3 levels of control zones around a hazardous materials incident are the cold zone, warm zone, as well as the hot zone. The hot zone is the most contaminated, where the cold zone is the most safe area. The incident commander must consider many factors before making decisions concerning evacuation, such as the nature and duration of the release, the nature of the evacuees, and the ability to support the evacuees with basic services and needs, as well as transportation challenges. The toxicity of the hazardous material and the amount of time available to avoid the oncoming threat are major factors in the decision of whether to evacuate or to shelter in place. Typically, before significant actions are taken at a hazardous materials incident, the incident commander should ensure that a written safety plan is completed and a verbal safety briefing is performed. A written safety plan should include information about excessive heat disorders or cold stress that responders may encounter while working in these environments. The incident command system has many benefits, including the use of common terminology, consistent organizational structure, and position titles, and common incident facilities. The ICS can be expanded to handle an incident of any size and complexity. The ICS incorporates 5 main functions: command, operations, planning, logistic, and finance administration. The incident commander is the person in charge of the incident. He or she is responsible for all decisions related to the management of the incident itself. The command staff consists of the safety officer, the liaison officer, and the public information officer. Groups and divisions are established to aggregate single resources and or crews under one supervisor. A hazardous materials branch consists of some of all the following staff as needed: a hazardous materials safety officer or assistant safety officer, an entry team, a decontamination team, a backup entry team, and a technical reference team. The operations level responder responds to hazardous materials incidents for the purpose of implementing or supporting actions to protect nearby persons, the environment, and or property from the effects of the release itself. And this concludes the end of Chapter 6.